Hi, and welcome to today's virtual field trip to Palm Beach County's Mounts Botanical Garden, where our topic of exploration is wild architecture. Today's live stream event is brought to you by Scientists in Every Florida School program and Mounts Botanical Garden. Scientists in Every Florida School is a free program housed within the Thompson Earth Systems Institute at the University of Florida. The CEFS program connects and builds long-term partnerships between teachers and scientists in order to bring current scientific research and big data into classrooms in Florida and beyond. Mounts Botanical Garden is a nationally acclaimed attraction for Florida residents and visitors alike, with a mission to inspire and educate through nature. Today, we'll be joined by Palm Beach architect Leslie Pearce as we explore the wonders and feats of architecture and, more importantly, how nature can be its inspiration. Leslie Pearce is a residential architect for Smith Architectural Group in Palm Beach, where she's worked for over 20 years. Prior to that, she worked in Manhattan. She works to travel so that she can expand her knowledge of architecture through the cultures she visits. She's a graduate of famed architectural school at Carnegie Mellon, and we want to be sure that you type your questions for Leslie in the chat box as we work through them in the program. At this time, I'd like to introduce the Youth Programs Manager of Mounts, Diane Rabina, in order to set the stage for a virtual field trip today with you and Leslie Pearce, the architect. Diane, please take it away.
Well, good morning, everyone. We can go to the next slide, Leslie. I would first like to thank you all for joining us today and give you a quick overview of Mounts Botanical Garden for those of you who have not yet visited us. This is our beautiful garden. Mounts Botanical is Palm Beach County's oldest and largest public garden, covering over 14 acres. We have more than 2,000 species of tropical and subtropical plants on display from 6 continents. The garden is made up of 25 unique display gardens with the plants that have been chosen to show visitors the planting choices they can make within their own gardens that will thrive in the heat and humidity of our challenging subtropical climate. One of the benefits of visiting a botanical garden is that it's always changing. The trees lose their foliage and flowers bloom at different times of the year, and we have lots of birds migrating through the garden during the spring and fall. And we also get a new influx of butterflies this time of year. Every time you visit the garden, you'll have a different experience. Next slide. Since we're talking today about nature and architecture, I wanted to show you some examples of how nature and architecture are displayed throughout the garden. This is Cutting Corners. It's an amazing structure in our great lawn, and it's a wonderful example of architecture using nature. It was built in January 2019 using over 30,000 pounds of willow. It was designed by internationally acclaimed artist Patrick Doherty, and it took 3 weeks to build using over 100 volunteers who spent countless hours inserting and weaving live willow branches to create these whimsical walls and windows. As you can see, the structure is alive and growing, creating a living art experience for all who wander through it. And it's a beautiful example of wild architecture. Next slide. So here we can see an example of architecture inspired by nature, which is different from building structures using nature. Windows on the Floating World is our largest specialty garden. It was created to educate visitors on the critical importance of conserving and protecting fresh water in South Florida. We get a lot of rain here in Palm Beach, and wet sidewalks can be a potential hazard to people visiting our outdoor areas. The puddles on these sidewalks not only leave visitors with wet feet, but those areas where water accumulates can become slippery and difficult to walk on safely. Although we get a lot more rainfall than most of the country, we don't usually see the severe flooding issues that other parts of the United States have to deal with after heavy rainfall. And that's because underground throughout almost the entire state of Florida is limestone rock. And this limestone is made up of the skeletal remains of ancient coral reefs, and it's filled with tiny holes. These holes enable surface water to trickle down through the rock where it ends up filling the underground caves that make up our aquifers. These aquifers are vital for everyone living in South Florida because this is where we get almost all of our drinking water. You can see what an aquifer looks like in the picture on the left. The caves that make up our aquifers are made up of limestone rock, and you can see the holes in the close-up picture. So back to the sidewalks. The designers of Windows on the Floating World solved the problem of standing water by creating the sidewalks to act like limestone. They were made with little holes throughout that allow the water to seep through them. This means no water collects on the sidewalks, and it makes them much safer for our visitors. The picture on the right shows one of our semi-permeable sidewalks And in the close-up picture, you can see the holes throughout the surface that enable the water to seep through. The practice of learning from mimicking the strategies found in nature to solve human design challenges is called biomimicry, and is changing the way architects and designers are looking at making buildings and structures safer and more sustainable. These sidewalks in our garden are a wonderful example of biomimicry and architecture inspired by nature. So at this point, I'd like to turn things over to Leslie Pearce from Smith Architectural Group, and she's going to tell you a lot more about wild architecture.
Thanks, Diane. So I'm going to talk to you this morning about nature and architecture and what makes it wild. First, let's talk about architecture. What is it exactly? You probably think of architecture as buildings, but it's actually more than that. Architecture is the art and science of designing physical structures. Buildings are only one part of that. A lot more can be considered architecture. We're going to look at all different types of structures and built objects that can be considered architecture. What is wild architecture? It's the way that architecture and the man-made environment, along with the natural environment, can shape our world. They can coexist and even inform one another, but still keep their own identity. Is this a tree that is growing out of a building? Or is it a building within a tree? Which is more important in the picture? Or is what makes this picture so unique is that they exist together and both are more interesting because of that relationship. Architects have to be creative thinkers and be able to solve problems. Anyone or anything can be an architect if they can do those things. Early in time, before people even walked the earth, there was nature. Perhaps we should consider animals the first architects. There were problems that needed to be solved. First, they needed shelter from the elements and predators. Like man, animals wanted to stay out of the harsh weather and to avoid being eaten. Here we see two different creative structures that provide shelter. On the left is a cocoon. The design of a cocoon is to protect the insect larva so that it can turn into a moth or butterfly while safely nestled inside. On the right is a weaver bird's nest. Their nests are so beautifully constructed of twigs and grasses that is actually the reason they were given the name weaver bird. But they aren't just beautiful, they have additional functions as well. The weaver birds live in Africa where it's really hot. The insides of these nests provide shade and they keep the birds cool in the daytime. There are sharp bits of straw and twigs at the entrance to the nests to keep out predators like snakes from climbing inside and destroying the birds and their eggs. But architecture isn't always a building or structure that provides shelter. Sometimes architecture is more about function. The beaver became an architect when he realized he had a problem to solve. He would build a great house, and then a river would rise or the current would increase and his house would get washed away. So he decided to build a dam. The dam is an intricately engineered structure of twigs, mud, rocks, and whatever else the beaver has available to him. Beavers use the dam structure to slow the river down and create a pond area. That area allows for a safe place to build their house. And the dam serves other functions as well. It filters pollutants from the water, and it also protects the beaver from predators like coyotes. The bee is perhaps the most sophisticated animal architect. Bees often use existing structures, but sometimes they create nests or combs from scratch. The combs are hexagon-shaped, complex structures. They store food, the honey, in their combs. They lay eggs, and they also protect their queen. The hive serves many purposes at once. The hexagonal shape is very stable and strong and can be infinitely expanded, enlarging over time as the colony grows. We've seen all types of animals that are architects. So far, we've seen the birds, the mammals like the beaver, insects, and also animals that live in water. The Nautilus shell is an example of what is called a golden spiral or golden ratio. Golden spirals exist in nature. Simply put, the shape is proportionately enlarged and infinitely repeated. Not only does the Nautilus use the shell for protection, but the individual chambers can be filled with water for the Nautilus to dive down in the water or emptied for it to float up. The shell is multi-purpose. It provides shelter, protects the Nautilus from predators, and also performs the function of controlling its depth in the water. Leonardo da Vinci found inspiration in the proportions of the Nautilus. Da Vinci was an architect, a painter, and a sculptor, among other things. He was always analyzing natural forms, looking for derivations of the mathematical sequences generated by this golden ratio. He realized that these proportions exist all throughout nature, in the Nautilus for one, but also in things like fern fronds, pine cones, and seed heads. Even aerial images of hurricanes exemplify the golden ratio. It is thought that people find things based on the golden ratio aesthetically more pleasing, basically more correct looking to their eye. Things like spiral stairs, while they don't actually increase in size, have the perception of the golden ratio because of the perspective or the way that you view them. So far, we've been talking about all of the great animal architecture out there, but let's look at a different aspect of wild architecture now: how human architects can be inspired by what they see in nature. In the last slide, we saw how Leonardo da Vinci took inspiration in the forms of the Nautilus shell. Here we have another architect, Antoni Gaudí. His cathedral, La Sagrada Familia, is in Barcelona, Spain. The spires that reach to the sky are very organic. Some people think they look like beehives, and I always think they look like corn cobs, but there's no doubt that they are very unique. Inside the cathedral is equally unusual. Gaudí wanted the interior to feel like you were in a forest, looking up through the trees. Look at the way the structure of the building is like the tree trunks, and how the light in the spires seems like light that filters through the tree canopy in the forest. The cathedral is so complex, it has been under construction for over 100 years. It started construction in 1882 and is still ongoing today. It's not hard to see the relationship of the natural to the built environment when we see these pictures side by side. While Gaudí's work is quite complex, this idea can also be applied in a much simpler way. Remember the weaver bird nest? The traditional, or what we call vernacular architecture of Southern Africa, takes obvious inspiration from the weaver bird. The layered grasses and small openings of these traditional African huts works in a similar way to the bird nests. They keep the air flowing through the hut and provide shade to the occupants during the midday heat. They end up being functional and beautiful at the same time. Let's look at another, more contemporary Spanish architect. This is a building by Santiago Calatrava. He often refers to natural forms for inspiration in his architecture. His work is really amazing, not just for their expressive shapes, but also for their structural stability. You may see all sorts of different things when you look at this building, but to me, it looks like these teeth on the left, all standing up in the same direction, like soldiers marching down the road. Architects throughout history have used natural forms for ideas. Calatrava is a modern architect. But let's go back in time a bit and look at more ancient buildings on the other side of the globe. On the right is Angkor Wat in Cambodia. This temple complex is the largest religious monument in the world and has actually housed many different religions since it was built about 900 years ago. The central towers of Angkor Wat were representative of lotus buds. Remember the picture at the beginning of the presentation? That was also Angkor Wat. There was a point in its history where it was unable to be maintained. Exactly why seems to be unclear. But the surrounding jungle vegetation crept into the complex, and today the ruins can be seen with amazing trees intertwined with the temple, creating a very eerie atmosphere like something out of Indiana Jones. Let's visit another building nearby that also looks to the lotus. Many of you may recognize the building on the right. It's the Sydney Opera House. I always thought it looked like a lotus blossom floating on the water. The shape of the roof of the opera house is similar to the layered petals of the lotus. The unique thing about the lotus is that it is a water plant, and the opera house appears to be just hovering on the water surface, defying the weight of the actual building. An important thing to note is that these last two buildings are both in the Eastern Hemisphere, where the lotus is a native flower. It's interesting to think about how architecture is inspired not only by its surroundings, but also its sense of place. A building like the Opera House would be beautiful anywhere, but it has a decidedly Asian origami-like feel that anchors it to its region in the world. Its meaning is amplified by the symbolism of the lotus in both the Asian culture and religion. In addition to taking inspiration from the forms found in nature, we can also go back to the functional aspects. We talked about how animals would use architecture to solve a problem, like the beaver. As time elapsed, man realized that he too had problems he wanted to solve, and it could be done in a similar way that the problem had been solved by wild animals. The beaver dams were such engineering marvels that the ancient Egyptians and Romans mimicked them in stone to create reservoirs. These reservoirs helped prevent flooding or provided irrigation for crops or other purposes. While the structures may look more sophisticated, their function is essentially the same. While this structure is mimicking nature in both form and function, we can look at another building that also mimics natural form and function, but in a less literal way. This gets back a little bit to what Diane was talking about at the beginning with biomimicry. This is another beautiful building by the architect Santiago Calatrava. While the first image we looked at had forms that were very organic, this building uses the concept of a skeleton, in this case a fish skeleton, as not only inspiration, but really as the base for the spine-like structure of the building. Calatrava is a sculptor, an architect, and an engineer all rolled into one, kind of a modern-day Da Vinci. His buildings take on anthropomorphic-like forms. Calatrava's buildings almost look like they are flexible or could move as easily as the fish swims through the water. In these past few slides, we've been able to see how architects have used the forms of nature to inspire and inform their buildings, both in form and in function. Let's explore one last approach to seeing architecture as wild. Architecture can integrate the living and natural worlds by using found materials. Buildings and structures often utilize natural materials, but when used in their simplest essence, the results can be quite dramatic. On the left is the famous bamboo forest in Kyoto, Japan. The tall bamboos bend in the wind, and you can hear the creaking grasses and rustling leaves as you walk the paths. It's extremely peaceful. Bamboo is an amazing building material for many reasons. One, bamboo grows incredibly quickly, with some bamboos growing literally feet per day. You can watch them grow. It's often used for scaffolding in Asia due to the fact that it is both lightweight and extremely strong. In Hong Kong, the bamboo scaffolding is used for skyscrapers over metal scaffolding as it is strong, lighter, and causes less damage if it falls. Bamboo has been used for bridges, flooring, walls, and so much more. We see it used here in a traditional Asian home, and it's easy to see how the bamboo needs very little manipulation to be a useful and practical building material. It is also used here for a simple bridge structure. It is so versatile and so prevalent that man will figure out a way how to use that material in as many ways as possible. It's expensive to bring materials from other locations, so it's important to be inventive with the materials that are around you. They don't always have to be used for simple traditional structures, though. Look how the bamboo can be used to create very modern, sophisticated structures. These archways and vaults are classical forms, but when paired with the bamboo, they take on a whole new relationship of classical form meeting traditional materials and yet used in a modern, unique way. This is where it really gets interesting. Architects love to take traditional materials and use them in new and creative ways. So if you're in Asia and the bamboo is everywhere, you figure out the coolest, best things you can make from bamboo. Let's say you're in Africa and it's really, really hot and there is no bamboo. If you're in Egypt, you might have clay and sand available. Egypt is mostly desert. Deserts are very hot during the day and very cold at night. Thick clay buildings made from the local clay and sand can keep you cool during the day and warm at night. The clay absorbs the sunlight during the day so that when the sun goes down at night, the walls radiate the heat into the structure all night long. The walls are cooling. So then in the morning, it is cool again for the day when the clay starts to warm back up. And this cycle keeps going on and on and on. It's like natural heating and air conditioning. Again, this is a more elemental example of how the indigenous materials are used and resources are used for local architecture. Even today, though, architects look to these simple materials to do exactly what we talked about earlier with the Opera House, to give them a sense of place and tie them to the natural world around them. From this Nigerian mosque to falling water right here in the United States, there is so much architecture all around us, and there's also nature everywhere too. Next time you see a great structure, whether it's a building or something in the natural world, think about forms and reasons behind it. It just might be wild architecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm very excited. We've had quite a bit of questions coming in, and I'm excited to have those questions answered by our expert. So our first question is from Charlie, who asks, what is one of the oldest examples of how humans have looked to nature to build something?
The dams are pretty early. They were some of the earliest structures. I would even argue, this is on the cuff, I would even argue that using a cave, although it isn't something that they've built, is a way that man looked at the environment and was able to integrate with it and use it as architecture.
Our next question is from Wendy, and she asks, is there an aspect of nature that you specifically look at in your own work?
That's interesting. So I think in my own work, when I have the chance, I really like the idea of sense of place. So I touched a little bit on that, but I mean, falling water for me is such an amazing example. It's a modern building. I mean, you can tell, you can look at it, you can see the slide happens to still be up, that it's very modern. But what I love about it is that it uses the flagstone from the regional area. It uses the clay from the regional area. And it really feels like it's integrated into the environment. I love to use local materials. Here in Florida, one of the things I like to use the most is coquina, which is something that's local to here. Coquina can be used in a very traditional way, but it can also be used as modern building facades. And it's really incredible and really looks like it belongs to here.
Our next question is from Miles. Miles says, I know that architects take temperature into account when building buildings. For example, there could be an issue with clay if it gets too hot. But what other opportunities are there or reasons why an architect would take temperature into account?
Well, heating and cooling costs obviously are expensive, and we're always looking for ways to make things more environmentally friendly, more cost effective, and more energy efficient as things go forward. We've all heard about global warming, and as architects, it's our job to kind of try to mitigate that as best as possible. So if we can build thicker walls, bigger overhangs, of course there's better insulation, but even things in the way we design it, courtyard structures, windows on multiple sides of the houses. I mean, I'm speaking obviously more for Florida because this is where we are, but that'll allow air to flow through and allow you to open the doors more often, maybe not use your air conditioning as much. These are all things that we can do to help protect our environment.
Mike is curious, what is your favorite structure that is camouflaged in nature?
Is camouflage. Falling water is right up there for me. I've been there over a dozen times. And while it may not be camouflage, the approach to falling water is incredible. It's through the woods. And as you sort of come out of the woods, you just see peaks of it in nature. It's a really amazing structure. The inside of it has all the natural stone. It's built on a stone sort of boulder that you see come up through the floor. There's a tree going up through the middle of the house. Frank Lloyd Wright really took into consideration his sense of place.
Our next question is from Emma, who asks, how do bricks keep their shape?
How do bricks, they're baked. So essentially bricks are like a clay material that's then fired in a kiln and it dries them out. And that's how they're able to keep their sort of solid form. Eventually, bricks can deteriorate, but they're pretty solid.
Bruce is wondering, does the Bauhaus movement repudiate inspiration from nature?
Let me think about that. I mean, no, I would say no, because I think architects always look at nature. Just because the Bauhaus used more rigid forms, it doesn't mean that they turned their back on nature. I mean, if you think of Mises Glass House or some of the other Bauhaus structures, the way that they were sat on their sites, the way that they did open their glass to the environment and interacted with nature, I would say that no, they didn't turn their back on it, although they may not have embraced the material usage as much.
All right, Leslie, we have time for just a few more questions. And our next one comes from Jennifer, who asks, what is the largest architectural design that humans made from nature?
Angkor Wat, I would say, I don't know if it's made from nature, but Angkor Wat that we talked about, it was one of the largest religious monuments in the world. I would say that that's up there. You could also, though, look to something like the Great Wall of China. I mean, the Great Wall of China was used with local stone. They weren't going to bring that stone from somewhere else. And the Great Wall of China is a huge piece of architecture. So those two kind of come to mind for me.
James is wondering, can you please explain what coquina is?
Oh, sure. So coquina is basically essentially coral reef, not the protected reef that you're thinking of, but it's deposits of what used to be reef material in the earth. So it has to be quarried at this point. We're not taking it out of the water, don't worry. But there were, back when Florida was not even Florida, these stone deposits were created, and they have beautiful imprints of shells, other sea life, and big open holes like you would imagine in a reef. And we're able to quarry that down near Miami.
Our next question comes from Brent, who asks, which countries do you feel do the best job of using nature as inspiration for their architecture?
So as you probably noticed from some of the pictures I pulled out, I really feel like Asia does a great job of this. I think the Asian culture is such that they really notice their environment. They spend a lot of time looking at all their flowers and their forms. They also have amazing nature in Asia. So when I go there and I see the Buddhist temples, and even as far over into India, where a lot of the temples have lotus flowers carved on the sides, things like that, I really feel like the Asian culture embraces the nature around them.
And for our final question, Marlene is wondering if you can please explain the perfect stone walls in Machu Picchu.
I cannot. I don't think many people can. I think they're not really exactly sure how those stone walls were created. It's one of those mysteries out there.
Well, Leslie, thank you so much. Do you have any final thoughts you would like to leave our attendees with today?
I would just say, and I touched on this a little bit on the last slide, when you go out there, out into the world, look around. I think things will surprise you. You might start, especially here, start looking for coquina. You're going to see it on all sorts of buildings. You're going to see it in sidewalks. You'll see shells imprinted in sidewalks. All those things count as wild architecture.
All right, I'm going to hand things over to Stephanie to leave us with some final remarks for today.
Thanks, Brian, and thank you, Leslie, so much. We want to thank everyone for joining us today on the call to learn a lot more about wild architecture. I know I found it extremely inspiring to hear all of these great things and the way that those nature-esque pieces are used in building. We hope you've enjoyed the presentation and have also been inspired to take a closer look at both nature and man-made structures around you. You can learn more about all of our programs by visiting the websites you see now on your screen. You can also find a recording of today's session if you're interested in those architect names, etc. You can go find that information by reviewing the recording at UF Thompson Earth Systems YouTube channel and the Scientist in Every Florida School website. We hope you enjoyed, and again, have a great day. Thank you so much, and goodbye.